managed to watch the programme on the BBC about ABA this morning, didn't you, on the eye catch-up thing? And what did you think of it? I mean, you know, what did you think?
I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, what? Did you agree with it all?
Not all of it, no. In fact, I didn't agree with a lot of this, in fact.
Didn't you? No.
No.
What didn't you agree?
Well, a lot of the people were really criticising ABA and saying that it's basically changing a child with autism, and it's getting rid of what makes them who they are.
Yeah.
And I disagree on this. It's just improving their skills. But I also disagree. There were some people featured. There were a few featured in the documentary that were for ABA, and they often said that they seem to say things like ABA is good because it's changing the child with autism. And I thought a lot of what they said, I didn't agree with either.
No.
Because they seem to say that stimming should be completely stopped, and I disagree with this completely.
Yeah.
And even though you want to help people with autism to get better, who they are must still be respected. You know?
Yeah. So Alex, now you have a very relevant thing to say about ABA, don't you? Because you had ABA yourself as a child for a number of years.
Yeah.
You know, what did you feel growing up having ABA? I mean, did what you saw on that film fit with your own memories of ABA?
I only very well. I think a lot of the time I did find ABA hard work, but they did still use a lot of my interests to help me.
Yeah.
And I think I benefited a lot from it, and I think I'm actually a lot happier now than how I would have been if I hadn't had any of the ABA.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, what do you say to the people? And there are people who've been going on forums and after this documentary and saying it's child abuse.
And they've been bashing it before they even know a lot about it.
Yeah. Do you think a television programme is enough to, you know, make a decision about what ABA is really like?
No.
No.
And also, do you think a lot of these people, they're just hearing it they're hearing the point of view from, they're kind of both hearing the extremes of both points of view, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
The people who are for ABA in the documentary were really going far and were trying to, they were actually almost saying, like, if they become angry, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, that was terrible.
And I think if you hear it from that point of view, then it could come across like, oh, we don't want to touch ABA, we don't want to use ABA.
Yeah. So, what do you think ABA, you know, from your memories of ABA, did you feel like people, like you know, you were, most of the time, did the therapist manage to make it fun?
I wonder if we should put this on YouTube.
Oh, we could do, yeah.
Yeah, I think, did they manage to make it fun?
Yeah.
I think they did through a lot of things, and they also, I mean, yeah, well, as I was being taught a lot of the things, they did often use my interests to teach me, especially in the later years. And I think this was definitely an advantage.
Yeah, yeah. So, because I mean, Alex, you find it hard, don't you, to learn from sitting in a normal classroom? I mean, you know, with someone just teaching. What happens to you when you're sitting in a normal sort of classroom setting where someone's just talking and trying to teach you something? What happens to you?
I just get distracted. I just can't concentrate on what's being said. It's often like I may be able to in some cases listen to what they're saying for a bit.
Yeah.
But when there's so much information being given, it's just too much for me to process. Like there was actually a time when I was in a photography course, and this the tutor, he had this screen up, this projector screen, and he was like giving us a tutorial of what we were meant to be doing, and then he expected us to go on the computer and do it. However, I started doing what was being asked of me as he was telling me on the computer, and apparently this is what I've been heard. Apparently he thought this was really rude. However, it was the best way of learning for me. Yeah.
So in terms of ABA, I mean, you know, how did that work? Do you think, you know, in terms of you had a home-based one-to-one program, how do you think that helped you to learn?
How do I think it helped me to learn?
Yeah.
Well, it's a very difficult question.
Yeah.
Could you ask a bit more specific?
Okay. Compare learning in a classroom like the photography course with, say, how you would have learned about history. How did you learn about history?
Well, basically, well, we read books, history books, but also, as well as doing this, we did activities for history as well.
Yeah.
And like we visited old castles. We once had a medieval banquet. And a lot of these ways, I think, helped me to learn.
So how do you think that was related to ABA? How do you think, how was that working, do you think? I mean, what was the thing, the reinforcer in that? How was reinforcement or a reward being used to help you to learn your history?
Well, they did fun things.
Yeah. So that by doing fun things, it was...
But I think history, I also found some histories easier to learn anyway.
Yeah.
Because I found that interesting.
Yeah. So you were following your interests. Let's think of some things.
But a lot of those lessons, a lot of the time when it had stuck in my mind, a lot of the time I wouldn't. I actually didn't forget the history.
No.
Forget it.
Now, some people are saying that ABA just turns a person into a robot. They haven't really learned it. They're just doing it externally. What would you say about that? Because you did obviously learn a lot of social skills. I mean, you can stand here, you're talking, you're looking at the camera. You learned those social skills through ABA. What would you say to people who'd say, well, it's trying to take the autism out of you?
I say, no, it's not.
Yeah?
It's not getting rid of autism. It's just, at least for me, I still definitely have an autistic mind. But it's just that I've learned a lot of skills. I've learned to fit in better.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of difficulties that I experience. And it has not cured my autism by any means.
And would you want it to have cured your autism?
No.
No.
So it is a part of who a person is. I think any method to improve a person with autism's life is always a good thing, I think. It's not the same as actually curing them. Getting rid of what makes them who they are.
Do you remember when you used to get really angry with frustration because you couldn't find the word? And I think it was the first sort of advice we had from a clinical psychologist was, I think, an ABA program while you were still in school. I was doing some ABA with you at home, and it was every time you couldn't find the word, you used to sort of completely have a meltdown on the floor. And can you remember that program? Do you remember when they had to have they'd have obscure pictures, and then they'd ask you, what is it? And then they'd prompt you to say, I can't find the word. Do you remember that? Well, I remember after you'd been doing this program in school, I remember that instead of you going but, and then the next second you're on the floor screaming and hitting yourself, I remember you just going, I can't find the word. And it was like complete calm, because it gave you the tools that you needed to cope with that frustration. Yeah. I mean, what would you say about that?
Okay, first. I think, about that, going back to it being cruel, I think, it cannot be called cruel when actually, I was obviously very frustrated with, struggling with language and that kind of thing. It was actually, to actually teach me skills to actually be able to communicate better. That is definitely not cruelty.
No. So do you feel quite upset when people say it's cruel? Do you feel, well, they don't know. They haven't been where I was before I had this help. How does it make you feel?
A little bit, maybe.
How do you feel about those with autism who obviously didn't have ABA and are very verbal and very able to communicate, and say you shouldn't ever do anything to get rid of autism? How do you feel about that?
Well, I can understand saying you should never get rid of autism, but I don't find ABA to be getting rid of the autism. It's like, you know, actually helping them to, it's just helping them to improve. There is no known cure for autism. But also, if you actually think about it, that these high functioning, you know, the people who are very verbal, like that lady in that documentary who didn't get diagnosed until, you know, she was an adult. They're not quite the same case because they're obviously, you know, they don't need the same. They don't need they're not as severely autistic, so it's not as important. It's not as important for them to have the therapy to actually improve, because if someone is like much more severely autistic, then, like, you know, they could be in a world where they're really just frustrated the whole time and can't talk or anything. And in those cases, a lot of time therapy can be much more important.